Good afternoon, or should I say good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the plenary session. I hope your breakouts were insightful and that you're ready to come back to the crux of our event around digital empowerment in action. Now, there's no person better to demonstrate that than the next guest speaker that I'm honored to be able to introduce to you. His name is Naresh Shanker, and he's the CIO of HP Inc. Naresh? So maybe to give a little bit of context, back I think in 2014, so on October the 6th, HP announced that it would separate into two distinct entities, enabling you to focus on what was core to your markets. This is basically the biggest corporate separation in history. And now that you've been able to achieve it, what would you say for you are the biggest challenges your organizations face at the moment?
Okay, so let me start with setting some context. So when we announced the separation on October 6th, it was 2014, and we weren't really quite sure how we were going to get the separation done. It was the largest separation that was ever announced in the technology world. And what was interesting about it is that this is my fifth separation, but we had never done playbooks. We've always had playbooks designed to execute these separations. But we didn't have a playbook to execute a separation of this magnitude and scale. And so we ended up actually designing our own playbooks to actually handle this separation. So just to give you context, we do business in about 168 countries around the world. We build and ship about 7 PCs and printers a second around the planet. And we run one of the largest supply chain platforms on the planet. I mean, we run our own manufacturing. We have about 100 factories around the world, and of which about 70, 80 of them are through partners and OEMs and contract manufacturers. But we have about 20, 25 factories that run our own products, especially because they're highly differentiated products. So the challenge we had was coming off the separation was that we were asked to do this in record time. We said that the separation would take about 15 to 17 months, and we were given 8 months to get the separation done. And we had to get it done in 8 months to meet all of the operational and legal requirements around the world, both globally, by region and country. So we fundamentally had to step back and do what we call a logical separation as opposed to a physical separation. So a lot of the work we did stems from that. So that's the backdrop around the complexity of what we were dealing with. Now you dial forward post-November 1st, and there are three major areas of challenges that we were faced with. The first one is that when you do a separation of this scale and you build to a logical separation as opposed to a physical separation, we end up having a lot of transition services agreements between both companies for a period of 2 to 3 years, because you depend heavily on each other to stand up your companies as public companies. So the first thing we put in place was transition services agreements, and so these are very, very significant agreements. The challenge is that if you don't accelerate and exit these transition services agreements, you will never stand up your company as an independent public company. And you will never even and you'll also prevent your companies from transforming and growing based on the strategies you've laid out for the next 3 to 5 years, because you're tethered between both sides. So exiting the transition services agreements was a huge challenge. And then the second biggest challenge was because the businesses now, as independent public companies, had laid out all of their core growth and future strategic plans. They found out that they couldn't really move their transformation agenda forward without first exiting the transition services agreements. Because every time you make a decision to change an environment, you have to get agreements on 2 companies, right? So what we've ended up doing is that we're running an accelerated transition services agreement plan around the world. Because we do business in 168 countries, we've got to separate all our real estate. We've got a history of being over 75 years old. There's a lot we've got to get done. And in parallel, we're running a complete greenfield transformation to run 3 pivotal businesses. So the personal systems, or PC side of our business, which is phones, tablets, engineering workstations. A lot of those solutions are on mobility, so that's the PC side of the house. The second business is print, which is ink, laser, graphics. And the third is the new business, an emerging business, which is 3D additive manufacturing. So what we're running right now is a massive transformation playbook around these three businesses in parallel with running the TSA transition agreements. So these are the two major things we're running. And then the third major area is what we call the customer 360 experience. When you split your companies, the people that get impacted the most are your customers, your partners, your suppliers, and your employees. And so the third program we run, and we've run from day one all the way through to the next 2 and 3 years, is to make sure we don't forget about these 4 critical constituents that we rely on heavily and why we exist. And so we run something called a 360 for customers. We run something called a 360 for our partners, suppliers, and our employees. And what that means simply is that every month we run all the processes and we test and check all the user experiences to make sure we minimize disruption to them while we exit TSAs, and we run all of our transformation playbooks. We've got to make sure that they don't get impacted. And so that is the third thing we're running. And so customer service support, repair, all of that is probably the first big program we're running. And we call it digital. Everybody uses the word digital. But I think it stems from creating user experiences. When you think about user experiences, the only way you can create the greatest user experiences is actually running a mindset and playbooks that are much more digital-centric in terms of touch, click, swipe. If your mind works that way, you start designing for a much more simpler ecosystem for people to interact with, and you create some great user experiences. So that's something we're thinking through this entire process, and so that's what we've invested heavily on in transforming right now.
Wow, the mind boggles just think about the sheer size of what you're doing. And of course, that obviously means also a cultural shift within your organization. What are you doing to promote specific attributes to make sure that you have the right culture within your organization?
Yeah, so I mean, the cultural shifts in a transformation like this are quite pivotal, and they're quite challenging. Because if you take the history of our company and the scale and the complexity of how we operate from global to region and country, every employee matters, every customer matters, and so what we discovered was that the principles that we laid out when we did the separation was governed by an entity and a team. I led the separation for HP Inc. I have a counterpart who led the separation for HP Enterprise, or I should say Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. And the first thing we put in place was a set of governing principles, a set of tenets, a set of rules to make sure that all decisions we made were fair on both sides, to stand up these companies as public companies. We also had to change the culture around, it was a culture around on discipline, execution, accountability, speed, agility. It was all critical because to take a playbook and reduce it by 50% from 15 and 17 months to 8 was virtually impossible to do if you didn't actually do a cultural shift in not just the work you're doing, but how you do the work. So that was instrumental. So we put that, and we called it the SMO, which is the Separation Management Office, and it was a governing team that ran the playbook 24/7, every day for that period of 8 months. And the way it works is this. Every issue or decision comes to the SMO every evening. And every evening, if it cannot get solved, it goes to the executive committee first thing in the morning or to the board at the end of the week. But we were able to solve 99% of our problems with the executive committee every day. So we had a culture where issues that were material and were raised would actually have a plan to resolution or resolved within a 48-hour cycle. So you raise the issue in 24 hours, you close in 48 hours. That was a big cultural shift in an organization that is so big, so diverse, so widespread, and so complex. But we had a core team of about 1,000 people, so it was instrumental that we keep this team together, focused on a single mission, single vision, and a single playbook with a set of rules and governing principles that we could execute. So culture was a big part of this. The other big shift we saw in the entire change in the landscape was we have a heritage of being an enterprise company. That is what Hewlett-Packard Enterprise is about. That was what old HPQ was about. Well, we are not an enterprise company. We are what I call very much a device-centric company, and an end-user-centric company. User-centered design means a lot to us. Human interface design means a lot to us. And it's in the DNA of the products and the solutions and the services we live and breathe every day. And so for us, this matters. And so making the shift culturally meant that moving from an enterprise company to a company that had the mindset of a consumer, but the execution was hardened for commercial grade and quality, right, in the user experience. I mean, was very, very paramount. So the cultural shift was very, very instrumental. And so we were able to actually carry the momentum of the cultural shift we actually implemented in the SMO, which is the Separation Management Office. Post-November 1, we transitioned and carried the momentum in something what we call the TMO, which is the Transformation Management Office. So the same rules apply, the principles apply, and we're running all of our greenfield programs using the same rules of the Separation Management Office in the Transformation Management Office. So culturally, we made that pivot, but it'll take us about 3 years to actually make sure the organizations evolve through this cultural change. And it's a journey. By no means is it easy to do. And it's something we just keep a very close watch on because we believe strongly that the cultural shift and the pivot and the foundation we lay for the new company will solve any problem you throw at the organization. If they've got the right mindset, the right culture, the right discipline, the right focus, the right collaboration, and they're focused on the greater good, which is predominantly for customers and employees and partners and suppliers. If they just focus, I think we'll have a great experience. So that's the focus of the new company, the new organization, and the cultural shift. I'm saying too much, but that's what I love to do because this is what we're doing.
No, that's fair enough. So with so many simultaneous transformations in flight, change management is, of course, absolutely key to manage the risks and make sure that you ensure the success of your efforts. Now, I had a question that I wanted to ask you. How have you approached the management of change with the introduction of new digital solutions and processes for, on the one hand, your customers, on the other hand, your partners, and your employees, all of that throughout the journey that you've just described?
Okay. So most people think, the IT organization that I shepherd, it's not really an IT organization. I come from a product background, and so part of my organization actually does products. We do a lot of engineering solutions for print, for security chipsets that go on cartridges, things of that sort. So part of my organization builds all the robotics that runs all the production lines for ink around the world. And ink production, for example, the price of ink is actually more expensive than the most expensive perfume on the planet. It's also more expensive than an ounce of gold. So you can just imagine what it takes. So what I love is that part of my team gets to do products and product engineering because it's a whole different mindset. It's a culture of innovation. It's a culture of entrepreneurism. And the teams are very simple in their mindset. They're very creative. They're very agile. So that's one thing I love in the organization because you need to have that as part of your teams to really think about where the future is going and how you think about solving problems. And so that's part of it. I think introducing a product mindset matters. And so the first thing we did in terms of change management, adoption, knowledge transfer, the first thing we did was actually cultivate a product mindset in all the solutions and services that we deploy. And so we have product managers in the organization for customer-facing solutions, for back-office operations, things of that. So these guys have to work with the businesses, and more importantly, they have to work with customers and our suppliers. So as an example, for the transformation work for the separation, we discovered that in an 8-month window, we could destroy a lot of value if we don't do this right. So the first thing we did was, on day one, we touched base with the biggest customers we have. We got them involved, the biggest suppliers. It's an 80-20 rule. You go after the 20% of your customers, your suppliers, your channel partners, and even your employees. You go after them and bring them into the ecosystem to be part of the solution for the separation. So they're very involved. They're very engaged in the design. And then they're next involved in the testing, in the user acceptance and testing aspects of it. And what's interesting about this is when you get them involved up front in the whole process, we found it much easier to transition. And so So we had an ecosystem of, and I have to say this is the first time I've actually gotten this community so involved, because I was a bit terrified that they would be so critical about what was going on that we would never make strides and get the transaction closed August 1st operationally and legally by November 1st. But we said we were going to trust this ecosystem that we work with. If we can't trust your biggest partners and your suppliers and your customers to go through this journey with you, then what do you have? I mean, it's going to be hard. So that was the first thing we did. We incorporated them as part of the formal process from day one till the day we went live. And what they helped us do is actually surface all the issues in the transaction. When they interacted with HP, they expected a certain experience, okay? And so we needed to make sure that that was never broken through this entire process. So we documented very closely and carefully the entire 360 experience for a subset of key customers and channel partners, suppliers, and even employees. And we actually took them through the entire process. And that, I would say, is also part of products. When you design products, at one point I was in the field of healthcare and medicine designing ultrasound and fetal monitors, patient monitors, echocardiographs. Then I went to Palm, and we're building mobile solutions around the world at Palm with WebOS and everything there. And the most important thing is getting them involved through the design phases and the solutioning and testing and deployment phases. And so that product approach has helped us in spades survive the entire separation. And to be honest, it was the success of the entire separation, I have to say, goes to the customers and the partners and the suppliers and employees that we had involved in helping us make this successful. We did a lot of the heavy work, but they gave us a lot of insight into what you think about, how you think about these problems, how do you solution them, and they also gave you alternatives. To a large extent, customers also gave us methods where they would accept manual methods. So they said, listen, you're not going to be able to automate this when you go live. This is going to be broken. And they would give us manual processes to say, why don't you use this to stem us over a period of time? And well, we automated some of the core things that were important. So it gives you some really good perspectives and insights that you should, at least for us, was important to listen to for us to successfully make this transition. So hopefully that resonates and makes sense, but it certainly made sense for us in terms of our execution.
Talking about customers, we all know that whether you're a startup or a 100 or 200-year-old company, customer satisfaction is, the key to your success. And I was wondering what factors led HP to rethink their existing customer experience, and what technologies you'll be adopting to enhance, improve, or even transform the existing customer experience that you provide.
Yeah. So, what's really changed is, I live vicariously through the eyes of my kids, actually. And it's often amazing what you see in their eyes that you sometimes feel silly because they see things that you don't. I mean, and I learned a lot about this when I was testing applications, very similar to the iTunes engine. We were testing the app catalogs and lots of these solutions. And when we were building these ecosystems of apps for mobility, I would bring in the 5th, 6th, 7th graders to test the apps. And they would fail 90% of the apps. But then I would bring in 40, 50-year-olds to test the apps, and the same apps, they would pass them 90% of the time. And what I discovered was that the use cases of how these apps are consumed and what it means to the individual that's interacting are quite different between emerging millennials and the next generation versus people that are in a mature industry. So they look at things very differently. And what we're starting to see, and why this is important to us, is the way our companies will run in the next 10 and 20 years will be very different from how we've run our companies in the last 10 and 20 years. So, and we've looked at our hiring patterns. We've looked at, early career hiring. We're trying to seed 50% of the company with early careers and the next generation of kids out of school and things like that. And we're learning a lot from them when they interact with us. And it doesn't matter if you're an enterprise company, a consumer company, a commercial company, it doesn't matter. They expect to have a great user experience, and they always ask you the question as to why they need to come work for you. And so we've started thinking about it, and what matters to them is the user experience. When they interact with customers, or they interact with employees, or they want to be very proud of the brand they represent. They want to be very proud of the experiences that are designed. And relationships matter. And earlier in the morning, there was topics on IQ and EQ, all that matters to them, right? And in mature industries, people care about IQ, and in the next generation of companies, people are going to matter, IQ and EQ matters, and empathy is a big deal. And so we discovered that what matters to them is how they think about solutions, how the user experience is designed around them, and it doesn't matter if it's a back office solution or a front office solution, it doesn't matter. That when they walk into work and they interact with an environment inside to do their jobs, they expect it to be simple. They expect it to be intuitive. They expect it to be interactive. Otherwise, they will not work for us. They simply won't. They'll feel frustrated, and they will simply leave after 6 and 12 months. We discovered that pattern. So we know that we have to change the way to be able to change the experience for customers, you have to change the experience for your employees, because your employees on the inside are customers on the outside. So what we have discovered is that change the experience for the employees. It's easy to do because they're right there with you. And if you change the experience for employees, you will have a lot of success changing the experience for customers. So user experience matters to us. It doesn't matter if it's a piece of hardware that we take to market. It doesn't matter if it's a solution you take to market for an industry vertical or a service. Experience matters. So we put a lot of effort and energy into it. So one of the most recent things we've done is that we're working closely with Orange. And one of the biggest programs we've launched around the world is CTI and IVR, which is computer telephony and interactive voice response. We are looking to actually move our entire call center community, which is massive around the world, because legally we have to get it done through the separation, and trying to sign telco deals in every country is a daunting task. So we've signed recently, this is just one example of a partnership with Orange to help us move the entire what I call support infrastructure, the call center infrastructure, because we ship 60, 70 million devices every year. We've got a install base of close to 600 million. So you can imagine the number of touch points into our ecosystem. So customer support, customer service, we're moving it into entire self-service. So here we're starting with the foundation, getting that entire architecture in place. We'll roll that out to the world. And then the next level will be moving all of the interactions that customers and partners have with us to a much more self-service oriented environment. So forums, chat on device, video chat, get everything to be a much more digital format. And so we'll be aggressively, that's just one example. We've got lots of examples. We recently launched print telemetry and PC telemetry. We ingest a lot of data. People often talk about big data. For us, little data matters, because what we struggle with big data, but it's the little data that you get out of the big data that you can make some real decisions on. So what we do is actually, we have launched PC telemetry and print telemetry around the world. And we get close to about something like 50 to 100 million connections a day into our networks. We feed all the telemetry data into the environment. We know, we discovered through the consumption of print, we've now launched a new digital subscription business for print. I can now give you a service on demand for $2.99 or $5.99 or all you can consume for ink. I know your consumption levels of ink. I can just keep shipping you ink. You use ink only when you need it, and you can do it completely on a subscription basis. We never ever dreamed that ink, which is so priceless. Can you imagine perfume being on demand for $2.99 and $5.99? And I don't think anyone's going to buy it, right? But people are consuming ink, and the retention level of customers is almost 98%. So this was a shocking revelation to us. That's just one example of a digital experience we've created with ink. And you can just go on and on and on. You take all this PC telemetry or print telemetry data, you find ways to go from big data to little data, and you can start finding ways to monetize these things that create a whole new digital experience that you can monetize. So I can go on lots of examples that we're discovering through this process.
I think maybe going into, you talked about, end user experience, employee experience, customer experience. If you look at your industry overall, and you look at what future evolutions will be happening, how do you prepare for that, and what decisions do you take?
Yeah. One thing I do love living in the Valley is that you gain access to a lot going on, a lot of good stuff and a lot of bad stuff. I mean, we invest in a lot of technology in the Valley. And so you have access to a lot of VCs, portfolios, and the thing that we do really well is to understand where all the investment trends are going. And so Some of the things we've seen and some of the things I've been involved with as well is that we're seeing a lot of investment going into sensor technology. And predominantly because we see a whole revolution happening with home automation, car automation, and office automation, or the workplace of the future. So you can just imagine your state as an individual, as you move from one state to the next, your identity is known, your behaviors are known, what you consume is known, and many, many different people are going to be monetizing services around you as you keep moving, whether you're at home, on the go, or at work. And so we think sensor technology is going to be it's going to completely revolutionize the space we're in, and it's going to create significant amount of monetization opportunities. So we're seeing that in spades happen across at home, in cars, and at office. So that is one space, the whole sensor space. The second space we see is commercial mobility. So industry vertical solutions are moving heavily into healthcare. They're moving into field service support. There's a lot of work being done in aerospace and as well as automotive and things of that sort. So we think commercial mobility has a lot of application uses if you design solutions for industry verticals. And so we see that as a huge opportunity. And commercial mobility can be any endpoint. It could be any form factor. It could be multi-OS. But it's the content and your identity that moves from form factor to form factor and how you monetize that. So we think commercial mobility is big. The third area that we're starting to see a lot is around 3D additive manufacturing. And I think it's about a 15-year, we're in the nascent stages of investments in 3D additive manufacturing. We'll be launching the first set of our products at the end of this year. It'll start with polymers at the low end. It'll be a commercial grade device. We don't think there's much money to be made in consumer 3D. I think all the money is going to be in commercial grade 3D. And it's going to be very high in material sciences. So it'll start with polymers. It's going to move up the chain. It's going to move into carbon and fiberglass, and it's going to go all the way up into material sciences around metals, right? So I think that is turning out to be 10 plus trillion in terms of the addressable market, because it's all around what we call injection molding, right? So we think there's going to be a significant race in revolutionizing the entire manufacturing space, and so we want to be front and center of it. And in this space, I think the industry verticals that will be the most attractive will be aerospace, will be automotive. We think healthcare in terms of prosthetics and mechanical hearts, things like that. So I think this is going to be a really, really interesting industry, and it's going to be a very, very intelligent industry. So I think those are some of the areas that we're starting to see and that I've at least personally tracked and followed very closely. And what are we doing as a company to respond to the changes that we're seeing? So we've got HP Labs. So HP Labs runs all of their playbooks for 10 to 15-year cycles. So we've got a strategy that we've laid out, which is called Core, Growth, and Future, okay? And that spans about 15 years. And so HP Labs is focused on 10 to 15 years. And then we just launched something called HP Ventures. It's a venture group. And it's an investment group that is actually going to be fueling a lot of investment into what I call early, mid, and late-stage startups, so that we get in early into a lot of these technologies, find ways to incubate them and monetize them, either through our product portfolio early in the life cycle, or start looking at how do we create adjacencies to our portfolio in those three waves of our strategy. So HP Ventures, HP Labs are going to be the way we actually enter the industry and start getting actively involved with a lot of this next generation technology. So more to come there, and lots of interesting things going on.
Absolutely. And if I were to ask you to sum up, maybe in a couple of words, how you see digital empowering business, what would you say?
Okay. The definition of digital varies from individual to individual. My world, especially how I look at digital, it is going from a transactional experience to a contractual experience to everything as a service, okay? That entire pivot is what I call a complete digital transformation. It's all centered and designed around a user experience. For many of us that are hardware players, it's going to follow the same path, the underlying foundation, which is you go from hardware to software to solutions to services. And so that's the cycle. And so it's a parallel cycle, and it's all enveloped around a user experience. And designing to a great end user experience means you are designing to a digital mindset. It's the only way you can design to a great end user experience. So that's my thought process on the matter.
Thank you very much. Thank you.